History, Anthropology, and Geography Department. In addition, he has facilitated various workshops throughout North America and has worked with several renowned scholars. And it's a pleasure for us to have him. And again, Bobby, we thank you for helping us organize this. Now, he's going to present for maybe about a half hour or so with different slides and things, different PowerPoints. It would be very helpful if you can write as you go through the presentation. If something comes to mind, go ahead and write your question in the chat box. And you see the chat box right at the bottom, most of us at the bottom of the screen. So click on that and you can ask any question through that. Now, after he finishes his presentation, we will have Q&A. But it is best organized if it goes through the chat. Doesn't have to. You can actually raise your hand also in order to ask a question. So without further ado, let's give Mr. Manu Ampim a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ronald. I appreciate it. And I want to thank Bobby Williams as well, and all of the other brothers who recognize the need to learn about our history, our tradition, our culture, and our contributions to the world. So, you know, I do feel many of us, we've been in academia or in the church community or other, you know, establishment, city government, and people use their titles quite a lot. But I like the idea that titles are just that, they're titles. We all have them, but it's not so much about a title, it's really what we can do and contribute. So I really, I love the format. I think the brothers are genuine in the no title approach, because clearly we all can learn from each other, and we don't want titles to be in the way. Well, I was able to join the brothers a few weeks ago, and there was genuine interest to learn more about African culture and African civilizations, and I was quite pleased. I didn't really, know what to expect. And, when you're dealing with a lot of people and groups in the community, you never really know what the reality is. Bobby spoke highly of the group, and I agree with them, that the group is quite genuine and sincere. So we talked after the last meeting and decided that a 6-week class, so 6-week seminar on African civilizations made sense, because the brothers were genuinely interested. And it's obvious that we can't, that we're not able to digest so much deep history in just one session. So a class makes sense. And so as Brother Ronald mentioned, so I just want to give some slides just as a foundation for us to discuss today. And I've been doing work and research for quite some time, and the purpose of information is to apply it. And for me, I was always puzzled as to why Black people were in the predicament and the quagmire that we were in. And I recognize that we suffer from historical amnesia. We've really forgotten who we are. And there's nothing more important than self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is the basis of true knowledge. So I've taken on my, I've heeded the call of my work to really research and interpret and write the best of the African historical experience. And so I've been doing work for more than 3 decades. So I have the pleasure of sharing with you some of the fruits of my work in the 6-week seminar. So, and this is obviously week 1, and I only want to talk for a little bit and then open it up to the collective. So I'll show you slides, which will make it easier. Somebody said a picture is worth, what they say? They said
1,000 words.
They said 1,000 words, brother, but I don't know who counted. I don't know if it's worth 999 words, 1,001, 1,005. All I know is images are impactful. And when I'm out in the field, I take images and record videos so that I can share with the community. So I want to share some of my slides with you to kind of walk through what I want to share. And so once this comes up, so the title for this Brother to Brother 6-week seminar is Black People in the Biblical Lands of Cush and Egypt and Their Contributions to the World. Actually, I probably should have called it Kush and Kemet, but Egypt is a little bit more common. So I've done quite a lot of work, and you can always go to my website if you like, manuampim.com. But I want to just introduce you to what we want to discuss today as the foundation for the rest of the seminar, and so that everybody has some insight. And just really briefly, the last book that I wrote is A History of African Civilizations. And this is just a small part of the work that I've been doing over the decades. But I wrote this book last year because I teach a unique class at Contra Costa College, and there's no materials. So I have to create my own materials to teach a unique class. And so that's the latest book that I've written about the African origin of humanity, and also just a snapshot of some of the African civilizations. And so this is a small part of the work that I do. And this is part of a History 110 class that I teach, but I wanted to also make it available to the public. And that image that you see on the cover is one of the greatest builders in the history of Africa. This is none other than the King Taharqa. Taharqa is a great builder from ancient Kush. And everywhere we look in the Northeast African region, in the Nile Valley, we see the fingerprints, we see the DNA of Taharqa. He built massive, colossal statues. He contributed to the spiritual or the religious system. Everywhere you go to a temple environment, there's the hallmark evidence of the contributions of Taharqa. There's parts of the great Amen temple, and there's columns and other things related to an expansive spiritual system. And Taharqa was also one of the great pyramid builders of his day. And we're talking about 2,800 years ago. That's about the general time period of the greatest builder in the history of ancient Kush. So today's seminar, we want to look at a timeline of the classical African civilizations of ancient Kush and Kemet. You know it, and most people know it as Egypt, but the correct name is Kemet. And then also people, when we read about Kush, the Greeks changed the name to Ethiopia, but the original name is Kush. So even the current country name of Ethiopia is a foreign name. It's a Greek name because they couldn't read or write any of the languages that they came in contact with in Africa. So there always was translations, and so many times we're using foreign terms. So I think it's best to put things in historical context today. And if you are taking notes, or just, I know you're listening intently, but as a professional historian, the key is to never start any focus or any study or any learning unless we put the information in what we call historical context. There are two aspects of historical context, or two elements. In other words, we mean it's time and place, or when and where. Those are the two critical aspects of historical context, because if we don't put information in historical context, and it sounds like a Mickey Mouse Alice in Wonderland story. And you notice that most people today, but particularly the younger folks, to be hip and to be cool and to be chic, because they don't really have a lot of details, they'll just say, what, back in the day? I don't allow students to talk about back in the day. Whose day? What day? It's not about back in the day. We need to be very precise. We need to have precision as we do historical research, because my motto as a primary or first-hand researcher is to make sure that we go directly to the sources to do original research. And the key issue is this, is that documentation beats conversation. People can always talk, but can we document it? And that's what the researcher is concerned about, is not necessarily what we know, but how do we know what we know? So historical context is important. So I won't go through all of the details, but just the timeline, we should know that Kush came first, and then Nubia, and then Kemet. So when I say classical African civilizations, this is the order in which these civilizations emerged in the Northeast African region. Kush came first, and then Nubia, and then Kemet, or we know it as Egypt. And the reason why we must call these classical African civilizations and not simply ancient is because what classical really means. Classical, if we define classicals, we hear about what? Classical art, classical theater, classical music, classical dance. So why place emphasis on classical? Because it's the meaning of it. It means the highest rank, the highest class. Anything, it's the standard, the model, the guide. It's the prototype. It's the paradigm by which everything else is judged. It's anything that has permanent and lasting value. That's what we mean by classical. So when we talk about ancient Africa, yes, sure, it's accurate to say ancient Africa or ancient African civilizations, but it's more appropriate to call them classical because of their not only longevity, but their high level influence that influenced civilizations throughout the millennia. And Kush is the oldest. It's hard to put a particular date on it, but we know we can document Kush at a very, very high level, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And the way dates are derived at is normally through different archaeological dating methods. And so that's one of the ways we're able to do that and come up with a general idea. So, but for this seminar, I want to focus on the two civilizations that are discussed most commonly in the Bible, and that's Kush and Kemet. Kush is mentioned about 58 times in the Bible, and Egypt, as all of us I'm sure we know, Egypt is referred to in the Bible quite a lot as well. Nubia is not so much discussed, it's not really discussed, but it's an important location in northern Sudan and southern Egypt, and there are many Nubians around today that represent this high-level classical African civilization tradition. So, and one of the things that inspired me many, many years ago is the work of Chancellor Williams. He wrote The Destruction of Black Civilization. And Chancellor Williams was a scholar because of the fact that he did, in the 1950s, he did research in 26 African nations, 26, and he did work among 105 different language groups. So he's a pioneer to go and really study from the actual records and do work out in the field. And when I read this some years ago, I was quite stunned at what Chancellor Williams's observations were after doing extensive firsthand research. And as you can see, he said, but the greatest of all issues is right here in the general agreement that at the very earliest period known to mankind, an African civilization in the areas later called the Sudan and Egypt was fully developed, with all the arts of civilized life already matured, its beginnings being placed so far back into the early history of the world that it is beyond the reach of man. In other words, the further we go back, we see a ready-made civilization. We don't see an evolutionary period of development for ancient Kush. When we go back, we see very high-level development, and the work really hasn't been done. We've only scratched the surface in terms of knowing about the antiquity and the power and the might of ancient Kush, and this is what has consumed my field work over the years, is to follow in the footsteps of Chancellor Williams. Now, just to move forward, so that's what has helped to inspire me, is his work. Now, this idea of Kush being the original name, and it's spelled, it can be spelled as a K most times, but it also could be Kush with a C. So in the Bible, when the Greeks came, when the Hebrew Bible was translated in Greek, the Hebrew Kush or Kushite became Ethiopia or Ethiopian. So that was the change that was made when the Greeks came around many millennia, many thousands of years later, and they changed it to Ethiopia. And you notice that it's with an A, so spelled a little bit differently, but this is in the Greek. And then later the A was dropped and it's just Ethiopia or Ethiopian in the King James Version. So what does Ethiopia mean, or Ethiopian? It's a man with sunburnt skin or black face, or someone who's kissed by the sun. So people say that, well, the ancient people were not really focused on color. Oh, yes, they were. The Greeks were fascinated by color. This is why they named these dark-skinned, these black-skinned people Ethiopian by their color. Even Arabs, even the area where this great civilization complex was, Sudan, it comes from a phrase, Bilad el Sudan, which means land of the blacks. So many foreigners were definitely struck by the Africanness of their skin tone. But this is how we get from Kush to Ethiopian. And so the current name Ethiopia is a Greek word. What does Kush mean? What's the original meaning of Kush? We don't know. All we know is that that's what the land was called at the time. So I won't go through the details, but one of the things that's fascinating about ancient Kush, as we look at the records, is the first established state on record, or the first centralized government. And it's a highly advanced civilization. And I know civilization is mentioned quite often, but for me, if we look at the root of civilization, it's civilized conduct, having peaceful and harmonious relations among ourselves and between ourselves and nature. So when I look at civilization, it's very different. But nevertheless, just kind of a general overview. Let me show you some of these categories of information to pursue the knowledge of ancient Kush. And one of the most important about Kush and how we can learn more is the biblical evidence. So Genesis chapter 10 is the Table of Nations. So Genesis chapter 10, 6 through 21. This is all of the family lineage. So if we look at Noah, according to the biblical text, he had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And so from these 3 sons of Noah, then we see more about the sons of Ham. So Ham is considered to be by theologians the not just the son of Noah, but as the progenitor of all of the black nations. So it goes back to Ham, and Ham had the 4 sons. And it's interesting the order in which these names are written. Cush came first, and then Egypt. Many biblical texts have Mizraim, which is Egypt. And I'm not 100% sure of why the N is missing. It says Put in many of the texts, but they're referring to Punt. Punt is the location of current day Somalia. So if you can imagine Africa on the eastern side of Africa, it's the Horn of Africa. That's where Somalia is. And there's a place today that's called Puntland. And so it was a holy place as they saw it. And then there's Canaan. So these are the 4 sons of Ham. And then there's other records that helps us to know more about this great civilization of Kush. I'll just mention or show just a few of these, but not go through all of the details. But this is how we learn more about ancient Kush. So first, I just want to mention in passing just some of the African American historians on Kush, because it's clear that my work over the last 3 decades is not totally original, but I am doing independent work. I have mentioned before, and it's worth mentioning again here, these are some of the pioneers that focused on ancient Kush or Ethiopia. Drusilla Dunjee Houston, who wrote in the 1920s. There's John Jackson, Ethiopia and the Origin of Civilization. And of course, anytime you see Ethiopia, they're referring to Kush. And then there's a William Leo Hansberry African History Notebook. William Leo Hansberry was a great pioneer. He was a teacher of Chancellor Williams, but he did not write himself. So one of his students, Joseph Harris, he collected Hansberry's teaching notes at Howard University and his research notes and came up with the William Leo Hansberry African History Notebook. And in volume 1 or volume 2, Africa and the Africans as seen by classical writers. So he compiled a lot of the work of Hansberry. Here's Drusilla Houston in her book in 1926. These are some of the pioneers who understood the antiquity and the importance of the classical African civilizations. She wrote several books, Drusilla Houston did, dealing with the people of Kush and them being the fountainhead of civilization. So that book, and that's one of the things now is that we're able to order a lot of these important texts. I'm just giving you a general overview so we can at least look at the contributions. And she's challenging scholarship to rise up and put in its proper place African civilizations, and not simply to refer to them, but let's look at them in great detail and give them their proper due. And that's one of the contributions of Drusilla Houston in the early part of the 20th century. And then there's John G. Jackson. He wrote a very influential pamphlet, Ethiopia, The Origin of Civilization. And a lot of these works are still available. You can find them online. If Marcus Books or other bookstores don't have them, you probably can find copies on Amazon. And one of the books that also influenced me quite a bit in the 80s when I started to first learn this is Ethiopia and the Missing Link to African History. And Reverend Sterling Means, he wrote this book, and it was very influential as I was learning about not only Christianity, but also African contributions and the importance of Ethiopia as well. That was important to me. William Leo Hansberry is considered the father of African studies because of his pioneering work of focusing on African civilization. This is Chancellor Williams's work. And one of the things that inspired me to look more into what Chancellor Williams had to say, and brothers, this also, I know we have sisters on tonight as well, is not just about blindly following these men. It's using their work as a roadmap, as a guidepost to know what direction to move in. And these were early pioneers, and pioneers We have to use their work not as a mattress to lie down on, but as a springboard to do better work and to build on their work. So when I saw Chancellor Williams's map in his book, he called this the Ethiopian Empire, and I was inspired by this to really go out in the field and see to what extent was he correct and was he right. And over the years, and studying over 1 million artifacts myself, I was inspired with the uncanny accuracy of Chancellor Williams. And there's a few adjustments here and there, but by and large, he understood the vast empire of ancient Kush. And he has Nubia as the southern part, and then Kim for Kemet, the northern part, and he's pretty much correct. So this is the map that I created with our group, Save Nubia Project, a few years ago, following the general and the original understanding of Chancellor Williams, because I think there's substantial evidence to indicate that this map here that we created of ancient Kush about 4000 BCE. So that's what's more common now, BCE rather than BC, because as a historian, we want to tell a history of humanity in a neutral manner. And BC, as we know, is before Christ, but BCE is before the Common Era. So about 2 decades ago, historians shifted to a more neutral way to tell the history of the world, because groups around the world have different calendars. The Mayans have a different calendar. The Muslims have a different calendar. The Chinese have a calendar. Hindus have a calendar. Ethiopians have a calendar that's different from ours. Many different groups. Hindu have a calendar. So we try to be neutral anyway. So that's why we use BCE. So this is a map of ancient Kush about around 6,000 years ago. And notice that it's a round number because it's hard to get an estimated date. All we know is it goes back into the early period of humanity in terms of high level culture. And you can see the area here, the inset shows the area. So we're looking at the ancient Kushite Empire. That's what we want to focus on, this whole Nile Valley region. This is the area of the classical African civilizations of Kush. And then as we go north, Nubia, and then Egypt, where Kemet is in the northern part. And out of this vast empire, you can see the current day countries: Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, but also across the Red Sea into Yemen and Saudi Arabia. This was the extent of the great Kushite Empire, and the heartland of this empire was current day Sudan, this area here. This is the area where Taharqa built his most enduring monuments. This is the era where they built monuments to last for eternity. They built huge religious structures, statues. They had urban areas, iron smelting, you name it, huge and extensive pyramid fields. But the heartland of Kush, current day Sudan. And so let me skip some of this, but field study is absolutely important. And we've just lost the knowledge of. This is just to indicate that this is a great tragedy that we have lost knowledge of our own civilization. So part of my life's mission is to help us remember who we are, and not just to be nostalgic about the old days, but to remember the best of our tradition and look at the principles and practices that allowed us to build for eternity and to apply those today. And that's really what the mission is. Foreigners saw Kush in a highly reputable light when the Greeks came along much later. No Greek writer said anything negative about the Kushites. Not a single negative word. They talk about the extension of the Kushite Empire. Some think it went as far east as possibly India. All we know that it did extend on the other side of the Red Sea into so-called what Euphorus is calling the Asia area. And so it was an extensive empire, to say the least. But the high respect. Homer is the first writer. Homer, the first writer in the history of Europe, the one who wrote the very first book, Homer, about 800 BCE. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And he indicates that the Ethiopians were blameless. Blameless in what? What does he mean? Blameless in matters of conduct, that their character was excellent. And that even the great Greek god Zeus had to leave Mount Olympus, and he spent 12 days at a banquet among the Ethiopians. How about that? You can see who's who has weight and influence, because normally people would go visit a god or a king or a ruler who is in charge. But in this case, Zeus, the highest ranking Greek god, he had to go and spend time among the blameless Ethiopians. and bring all the other gods with him. So he had to leave Mount Olympus for that. So that's a high level of respect there. What Homer has to say. Notice what Herodotus said about these Kushites. And notice, and most times people think they are the best looking people in the world because that's what they think when they look in the mirror. But look at what Herodotus, the Greek historian, had to say. The Ethiopians are said, he means said among the Greeks, to be the tallest and best looking people in the world. Interesting. And by the way, the tallest people in the world are in South Sudan as a group, the Dinka. The Dinka, they're the tallest in the world. But anyway, Herodotus is referring what the Greeks said about these people. So there's many contributions that the Greeks gave to and assigned to the Ethiopians, the first to invent the science of the stars, meaning astrology, and gave names to the planets, meaning astronomy. So here they're giving credit. Lucian is giving credit to the people of Ethiopia or Cush as the ones that created astrology and astronomy, and then pass that on, according to Lucian, to the people further north in Egypt. And others like Diodorus. Diodorus said it was the Ethiopians who taught people to honor the gods, to have sacrifices and processions and festivals, and have these in the name of the Creator, in the name of God. And so you have foreigners giving nothing but high praise when we look at what the Greeks actually had to say. Now, people today call these Kushites the Black Pharaohs. Some of you may have heard that description. The reason why this is a misnomer, there's no reason to call them Black Pharaohs because all the pharaohs were black. And when people are talking about the Black Pharaohs, what they mean, they're talking about the kings from Cush. And this is a National Geographic. This was February 2008. And when people saw this title, they say, yay, we won. The mainstream is now agreeing that these were Black pharaohs. Oh, wait a minute, read the article, it's very negative. They're talking about the people from the south, from Sudan. The great Kushites were simply imitators. They were just imitating the non-Africans or the non-Black people in Egypt. That's how the story goes. This is nothing but misrepresentation. And besides, why is anybody talking about Black pharaohs? By definition, they're black, and they're talking about the 25th dynasty, about 800 or so BCE, in order to suggest that all of the kings and rulers before this time period were not black, the first 24 dynasties. So this is what we call academic propaganda. And then you have scholars like Robert Morcott, who picks up the theme, talking about the Black pharaohs. And this is none other than Taharqa, but to show you the mainstream confusion, Taharqa was a Kushite ruler and it was not from Nubia, but this is the kind of misinformation that takes place. So there's no reason to talk about Black pharaohs. They're all black. They're all of African descent, and there's no evidence to the contrary. This is nothing but academic misrepresentation that continues to be made. And nobody talks about the white emperors of Rome. Nobody talks about the white or European Greek rulers. It's assumed. So why wouldn't it be assumed that the people in Africa who were building for eternity were also black? But that's why we reject this idea about Black pharaohs. We don't talk about the wet rain. By definition, the rain is wet. So why would someone be repeating what we already know? This is just to confuse the student or the person that's learning to talk about only one period of Black pharaohs. No, it's all Black rulers from the early period up to the 25th dynasty. And so anyway, just really briefly, we look at Cush because of their contributions. They were master builders. And one thing about the Kushites, they didn't go out and start taking other groups' land. They don't go and start creating a war or anything like that. That's why their tradition was to be blameless. And it's an appropriate title. When the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in 1907 went into the region and started pillaging the area and taking artifacts, they were stealing. And in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, here's one coffin of the King Asfelta, and this is from 1923. Notice the headline: King Asfelta's sarcophagus or coffin is too heavy for the art museum floor. This is 13.5 tons. They had to build a brand new floor in order to house this relic from Cush. Notice the beautiful jewelry. The craftsmen were at their best. When we talk about classical African civilization, we're talking about a very high level. at every area of civilization. Some of you may have seen this image. Sometimes this is online, or people now have them on some t-shirts or bags, but these are Kushite rulers from, again, this is the heartland of some ancient Kush, and they're very high level. Notice the artists, notice the linen outfits, the jewelry, notice the almond-shaped eyes. This is a clear sign that we're looking at ancient Kush. And notice the crowns. These are princes. You see the crowns there. You see the rings of gold. It's an area rich in gold, to say the least. Then you have some servants here on the left. But this is some of the Kushite artifacts. That's how we learn more about ancient Kush, by doing the field work, as I've done in that region for many, many years now. And then obviously some of these are in museums. Look at this, you know, they were able to shape any kind of stone. This looks like the origin of the modern tweezers here. Now, I don't know if anybody was smoking, but this, let's be honest, this does look like a ashtray. Although I doubt it was actual ashtray. But anyway, here's some of the artifacts here. Notice the rings, the bed, the craftsmanship at its best. And they were close to nature, very close to nature. If you take a close look at this bed, thousands of years old, look at the pristine shape that it's in. Look at the matting of the bed. But notice the legs. Notice the legs. The legs are always being the hoof of a cow or the claws of a lion, because they were close to nature. And you always find designs linking them to nature. That's important. You can tell an ancient artifact versus a newer item. When you go back to antiquity, you always see the closeness to nature. You can see the beds, the chairs, always with animal hooves or animals and plants are always drawn. Even here on the rings, you notice the cobra here and the vulture. So everything, this is what you see. There's a writing script that still have to be deciphered, the Meroitic Script, a sophisticated writing system, which was required when you have a vast civilization. Notice this, most people see a fly as a pest. They didn't, not the Africans, they didn't see a fly as a pest. This is one of the most important pendants that a soldier could be given, a fly pendant. And here you find the soldier, but a fly pendant, that was one of the most important honors that a person could receive, a fly pendant, not a pest. And also interesting is that they associated the fly with someone who's an important soldier. They did have to defend themselves sometimes, but you don't see Kushites extending out and conquering other groups through warfare. There's no evidence of that. We know they had a vast empire, but how they created it, no specific evidence. So the bee associated with kingship, the fly with a soldier. Here's some other pottery of ancient Kush. Notice this, you see the handle here and the spout. Notice the spout, you see the, what do you think this is? This is the horns of what? A ram. Always nature. And the black top pottery is consistent throughout the entire region, you know, for liquids, for grain, you name it. This is what we find quite often. Here's one of the large statues of Kushite rulers. This is me in front of one statue in Sudan. This is in front of the National Museum in Khartoum, and made out of granite. The stonemasons are at their best here. So we have to continue to learn more about ancient Kush. Let me skip here. Then you have some of the other images from Kush here. You see the images of gold, the ostrich feather. These were high-level individuals here, probably representing different districts and regions, because not anybody can simply wear an ostrich feather. When I did research in the area, every chief, every king, every elder, they said the same thing. Only a hero, only a priest or priestess or a chief or king can wear the ostrich feather in special ritual and ceremony. So, and those priests and those kings and chiefs today give a lot of insight about their current practices, which helps me as a historian know about ancient Kush itself, to be able to interpret more with more detail some of these scenes. And these are some of the Kushite pyramid builders here. This was found, I think 2004, somewhere around there, by French researchers. And that's when they start promoting this idea of black pharaohs. No reason to talk about black pharaohs. They're all black, they're all African. And so anyway, you see these beautiful scenes. And these are ancient Africans who built long-lasting civilizations. So let me just show you some of the Kushite pyramids that still stand in Sudan today. There's different pyramid fields. There's at least 223 pyramids in the region. One of the areas is Nuri. And these were kings, queens, and high officials and family members that were part of this tradition of building these powerful monuments. And you might ask, well, where would they get the idea of building pyramids from? Well, there's naturally occurring pyramids in the area. Wind and sand naturally produce the pyramid shape, which survives over time in the desert. So they didn't get it from interplanetary travelers. So let's abandon the idea that ancient aliens came from Mars, descended on Africa and built pyramids and descended back up. This is preposterous. But this is, this is Eric von Däniken, and in his book Chariot of the Gods. I'm surprised if von Däniken is still around promoting this mythology. There's a whole region of pyramids in the entire area, and you see naturally occurring pyramids that inspired them. We don't need interplanetary travelers to come and build pyramids and then take off. You have a whole pyramid field like Jebel Barkal. And by the way, it might appear that, oh yeah, I can see a little bit of damage. No, this was done in modern times, people looking for gold. But Jebel Barkal is one of those pyramid sites. These pyramids differ from the ones further north in Egypt because they're more thin, they're more narrow in shape. And their construction as they are laid out is also very different. Like the Begrawiya pyramid, you don't find pyramid fields quite like this in Egypt. This is the Begrawiya pyramid field near Meroe. Meroe was an iron smelting region that had an estimated 20,000, maybe 25,000 people. These are large urban areas that were built. And again, they were not focused on fighting and warfare. They had built harmonious cultures that lasted for quite some time. And Begrawiya is one of those pyramid areas. And every pyramid, by the way, had a chapel in front. You know, these are spiritual centers for rituals and ceremonies. So it's not just people building monuments to elevate kings, just like brothers and brothers are not focused so much on titles. They weren't focused on that at the expense of the rank and file people. And by the way, I know it's brothers and brothers, but in the Kushite Empire, women were elevated to a very high level, the queen mothers. So these are some of the Kushite pyramids. This is one of the shots that I took when I was there before. Actually, I think about a year and a half ago. And if the social restrictions of traveling kind of eases up, I hope to go back to Sudan and take some more images and learn more too. I want to continue to learn about ancient Kush. There's not only pyramids, but there's other archaeological sites like Warat. And this archaeological site is one of a number of them. And here you see the Queen Amenatori. And one thing you will notice with a lot of the names, most often you'll see the name Amen in the name. So this is Amen. So when people in their prayers, this is the God Amen or Amen. Here they're just showing with a human body, a ram's head, because the ram was important and sacred. That's why you see the ram. Even today, you go to the temples, you see a lot of rams. I'm talking about right now. But then here's the queen, notice her name, Amenatori. And sometimes, you know, it's hard to know. In the language of the area, it's just like Hebrew. In Hebrew, the vowels are not written. But of course, every group speaks with vowels. It's just that the vowels are not always written. And so, in other words, it's shorthand or abbreviation. So we have to guess what the vowels are. And as we guess, it's not clear if it's an E, like here, or even an A. All we know is that you have just the main consonants. But this is the female ruler and the line of female rulers. And Amenatori was also one of those pyramid builders. Also, in terms of Kush, I've gone recently to Ethiopia because in this area right here, the special nation, nationalities, and peoples region, this is an area where you have cultures that have not changed very much at all. So most of us, we know Ethiopians and people from the northern area in Addis Ababa, the capital. But when you go to the southern area, this is a special region where there's over 40 different groups and their cultures have not changed much at all. So this is why I'm able to go and learn more. And so this is a demi ceremony that these brothers were performing. It's an important ritual, important ceremony that has to do with fertility. And there were brothers, and these brothers are very high status. This is not their hair. Actually, this is from the ostrich. This is part of the ostrich feather. But I was able to witness the demi ceremony and learn what I could about the importance of that ritual and fertility as well. And so you have brothers and sisters performing this important ritual. But what's important about this is their rituals, their ceremonies, their understanding of what they're doing gives me, as the researcher, insight about the past. So this is all a part of the Kushite region. Their language is a part of the Kushite language family. They don't know about ancient Kush, but what they do know, this is the Decenage. This group is called the Decenage, and they are in Ethiopia, right on the edge between Ethiopia and Kenya. But the Decenage know about their culture, and they know that it is clear that their language is a part of ancient Kush. So for me, in order to understand the past, we must do extensive research on the present. And it's not to suggest some things haven't changed. They have, but for the most part, things stay the same. You know why? Because these groups are isolated and they don't care anything else about any group. They're focusing on maintaining their own culture. So it's interesting to spend time among these different groups as they perform rituals and ceremonies, and not any old person. Like this lady here, I don't know if you can see this. She has an ostrich feather. You all see this right here? So this is clearly an elder among them because of the ostrich feather. This can only be worn by a special person. And that's what you see here is a village of important individuals here. This brother here, he posed. I had a close-up of this image, but just in the interest of time, I took it out. But he's got a lot of marks on his body, and I asked him because, you know, sometimes they have conflict with their neighbors over land, not ideology, but land, because the Ethiopian government has been kind of encroaching on the areas, and so this is part of their rituals and ceremonies. One other thing I want to point out, that's Kush, just in terms of the identity, because as we go through the contributions of ancient Kemet or Egypt, particularly dealing with those contributions in great detail next week, we have to at least establish the identity of them being Black or African, because of the fact that somebody's probably thinking that, well, okay, it sounds good, but how do we know that these are Black folks or African? Well, there's different pieces or categories of evidence. One is the archaeological record. So clearly the people of Kush were African, but when we go down to the northern area, and that's down north, because as you go north, you're actually going downhill. So it's the opposite of how we think. So in the south, up south is Kush, the heartland of Kush. And as we go down north into Egypt, then we're going past Nubia, and then finally in the northern area is Egypt or Kemet. And these are Africans. So the people who are there today have nothing to do, no relationship whatsoever with the ancient civilization, nothing. These people have come from Saudi Arabia, they've come from Lebanon, and they come from different other places, but they don't represent the ancient tradition. Very few people in that area represent the ancient tradition, but we have to, even to find them, we have to go to the extreme south of Egypt. But let me just show you, not to focus on it too long, but just to give you an idea so that we're clear about the evidence. We are talking about Black people in the biblical lands of ancient Kush and Egypt, is that this is the greatest statue on earth. This is the most well-known and the most famous and most influential statue on earth, the Great Sphinx. That's part of a Greek term. The original name is Heru-em-akhet. It means Heru in the horizon. Heru, this is a representation of kingship. And if you go to Giza, there's the 3 great pyramids. You see 2 of them here, but as you go down the hill, there's this great monument. Here it is here, the great Heru-em-akhet facing the east, facing towards the rising sun in the east. And this is a man. If you can see this box, this is a man. This is a 66-foot high statue and about 240 feet long. It's the greatest and most well-known statue on earth. It really is. And so if we take a closer look at this great statue, a lot of times we see, and it's pretty obvious that the nose is obviously and deliberately was damaged. Some people think it was Napoleon. I don't think it was Napoleon when he went in 1799, because I have a drawing of someone who went to the area as an artist. And 44 years before Napoleon, the nose was not shown in the drawing. So we think it was missing long before Napoleon. We see this view, but and it's an important view of the greatest statue on earth. But what doesn't get, what people don't normally see is the profile view. This clearly is the profile view of a brother. This is the brother. So in other words, from brother to tell you this is in fact an African. And even though the nose is gone, look at the high cheeks, and yeah, There it is. You got the African kissy lips. And if you don't have on your glasses, or if this is a little bit too small, then let me give you a close-up tonight. This is, in fact, the kissing lips of an African. This is a brother. This is the greatest statue on earth, an African. And it's amazing when you go to the area of Giza and see this great statue. I've never heard so many adjectives. Oh my God, this is great. This is powerful. Oh my God, I didn't know it was so large. And guess what? I stayed in Europe for a year doing research in libraries and archives, and never once. It's not exaggerated, never once. I went to 11 European countries to go to museums, institutes, and libraries that had taken African artifacts, never once, going to Oxford and all these prestigious places and cities. I never once heard anybody talk about these buildings in great terms. People were excited to be at these places in Paris and London and all these places to take pictures, but the monuments don't rival this, and you don't even hear people trying to compare those monuments to the greatest statue on earth. So we could stop at the Great Sphinx, but what if we just simply look at one line of evidence, and that is having to do with hair? This is none other than what? A comb or a pick, or let's be more specific, an Afro pick from 5,000 years ago, literally. And notice that you see the animal here close to nature. And in the old days, sometimes those teeth of the pick were broken sometimes. But clearly this is part of the evidence that these were Africans in the area. This is now what we've left Kush. Now we're dealing with Kemet or Egypt. Take a look at Sister Henu. What is she doing, you may ask? She's braiding hair. This is an African hairstyle. So it's amazing how people talk about, oh, I love your French braids. It has nothing to do with the French. This is an African hairstyle. And in fact, if you go to Ethiopia today, and you go not to the city areas, but if you go to the small areas and towns, every woman has her hair braided. It's an Ethiopian tradition, even now. And here you have the glyph. See the glyph for braided hair? This is Sister Henu braiding hair. It's an African tradition. Take a look here. Notice the beautiful image. You have the princess with a bouquet, the almond-shaped eyes. Notice the nice, beautiful braided hair. You see it everywhere. This is an African tradition, and these images are rarely shown on purpose, And take a look at Amenemhet III. We can tell Rastaman that, hey, you know what? We thank you for continuing the culture, but you didn't originate locks. We got Amenemhet III from the 12th dynasty. We're talking 1900 BCE. Talking about 3,900 years ago, and clearly he has on locks. So when archaeologists first saw this some years ago, this is in the Cairo Museum, by the way, in Egypt. They thought he was a foreigner. Nope, not a foreigner at all, an African, running the nation in locks. Or we can talk about, as we mentioned before, the first dentist in the history of humanity, Hesi-Ray. And I think we did conclude, and we do have new people that are with us tonight, but take a close look at Hesi-Ray. Take a look at the helical structure of the hair. I would like us to reconfirm that Hesi-Ray, the first known dentist in the history of humanity, image of 4,800 years old, that he just came from the barber. He just came from the barber. So I think we can all agree to that. This is a fresh cut. Why isn't this shown? It's one of the most important images in the history of the world. The chief dentist. Or if that's not enough for you, what about a whole case of Afro wigs worn by priests? We can look at hairstyles to indicate the really high level culture, and coupled with the fact that these are Africans. There's no question whatsoever. Even the dolls that the children played with, notice they use beads to represent what? Braided hair. Notice the fabric they use to represent the skin tone. So it's everywhere in the culture. And this is a wooden doll. You notice the dress here. So we can look at all of the different evidence. And so next week, that's just a kind of an overview. With one thing I didn't say about Egypt or Kemet, when we look at the founding of the nation, the first dynasty, and a dynasty is a family of rulers, we're talking about 3,100 BCE or 5,100 years ago. So again, Kush, we go back to maybe 4,000 BCE or 6,000 years ago. And then Egypt, we're talking maybe 3,100 or so BCE as a timeline. And other cultures like Sumer came later. much later. And much of what we read about in the biblical text, this is, if we go by traditional dates and timelines, that would be after the archaeological record clearly establishes Cush and Nubia in Egypt as already being established and highly developed. So next week, we'll start dealing with the contributions, specific contributions, like in writing and ethical values. That's really important. So next week we'll deal with, I want to open it up for discussion now, but next week we want to really deal with writing and ethical values, and that's why we'll look at Acts 7:22, because Moses is the lawgiver, and as some of you, as many of you, most of you know about Moses' role in the Ten Commandments. Well, Acts 7:22 clearly indicates that Moses was learning all the wisdom of the Egyptians. So it's really, really important to know that Moses was steeped in this tradition of ethical teaching and learning, and because that's the only way he can know all of their wisdom. He would have had to know the 42 declarations of innocence. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you as kind of an introduction, and then leave some time for discussion. Obviously, we could say a lot more, but I wanted to just end it there and just at least give an overview and a foundation that we want to look at Cush, and even in more detail Egypt as we move through the seminar and their contributions to the world, tangible contributions, and we're meeting every week. So Brother Ronald, I want to just kind of leave it there and see if we have any, not just questions, but comments or input, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely wonderful. We thank you. That was absolutely beautiful. And you have a few questions in the chat box, but ladies and gentlemen, if you could put your hand up, raise your hand. You just go down to hit participations, and then at the bottom you can click on to raise your hand to ask a question. So that's one way of doing it. We have Manu, you want me to pick the people, or you want to in a row? Why don't I pick them and you answer them, okay?
That sounds good, Ronald. Yes,
all right, so let's go with Oliver. Oliver Boulanger. Go ahead, Oliver. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I had a question. The last presentation you did, you spoke of slavery in that region, or the lack of, and yet the Bible is based on, on the concept of slavery in Egypt. So can you speak to that?
Yes, sir. I think last time it came up, or maybe I brought it up, that I know that in the biblical text, and then the Greeks made up things too, but people have the idea that the pyramids were built by slaves. And I said there's no evidence of that at all. And there's a place called Nazlet El Saman. And Nazlet El Saman is a place that was excavated and discovered in 1991 in Giza. It's right near the Great Pyramids. And Nazlet El Saman, I'll put it in the chat for spelling, but Nazlet El Saman is a place that what's been found there are not only the tombs of the workers and the officials, but in those tombs, we have the title of the individuals, and also there's the documents, the actual papyrus documents that indicated the work roles, when people work, how they were paid, what days they had off. So in Nazlet El Saman, for example, since 1991, the claim about slavery was always curious, but since Nazlet El Saman, no evidence of it at all. So in this area, they call it the workman's city. People were paid. Well, actually, before they were paid, let me say this: they worked 7 days, 3 days off. They worked 7 days, 3 days off. So a week was 10 days. So the way the workers were paid, and they were rotating in for every 90 days, they would work and go back to their local areas. They were paid with grains of wheat, paid with grains of barley, and with linen cloth. This is how they were paid. The documents indicate what those payrolls were, what people's titles were, how they were paid, when they were paid, when they had days off. And one thing about Egypt or Kemet is that they documented everything. In other words, when they did have to come after somebody, then they would show that. Like, for example, when people didn't pay their taxes, that was a big thing. You don't pay your taxes, you actually see them, when somebody doesn't pay their taxes, you see them beating somebody. You're going to pay taxes. So the thing is that they're not hiding. They're not hiding and only presenting what is positive. They're writing down everything because this is them documenting their culture. But Nasser El Saman, I'll put this in the chat, is the workman's urban area where we now know exactly how the work was organized. And they were organized into units called a ZA, Z-A. And these ZAs, they would work on public works projects, building temples, building other monuments, and also building pyramids. And so people would rotate in and would work, and they would rotate back into their society. So these were communal, cooperative, and collective public works projects built by African scientists, African stonemasons, African managers, who were able to organize thousands of workers without exploiting the labor. And so Nasser El Saman is the most definitive and direct evidence that shows exactly how these work organizations were set up and organized. And so that's why I said before that there's no, and that's one reason. The other reason is this idea of slaves building pyramids is an issue of chronology. The pyramids go back to 2600, 2700 BCE, or before the Common Era. And who's the first Hebrew? We're looking at Abraham. He's 1,000 years after, literally 1,000 years after the pyramids are built. So you got an issue of chronology there as well. So that's why it's very hard. As a matter of fact, no one really, people may have an opinion, but from a research point of view, no one makes that argument anymore as they did. And that was promoted in the Ten Commandments with Yul Brynner and all of these other things, to show slaves. And not only that, they show nothing but white folks, show you how unreliable the Hollywood version has been. But Nasser El Saman, this is the area that is the workman's city that built the pyramids. So that's what I would share. Workman's city near the pyramids. So I'm putting it in the chat there. And again, somebody asked, BCE is before the Common Era. Before the Common Era.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go with Lenny Wilson. He had a few comments in the chat box, but go ahead, unmute yourself, please, Mr. Wilson, and then ask. Go ahead.
I'm one of the sisters from Allen Temple, so I'm not a gentleman, I'm a woman. I have two comments, two questions. One is somewhere I read, and forgive me, I don't remember where it was, that Herodotus says that the Greeks spent 18 years at the library in Alexandria and took it back to Greece, and that's the formation of Western philosophy. It came out of Africa, and I wanted to know if you were aware of that and where it came from. And also, the library at Alexandria was destroyed, and this is thousands of years later, I guess, and I believe the remnants of it were taken back to Timbuktu by the Muslims. So I just wanted to ask questions about that. And also, could you comment on the women pharaohs?
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start with the Library of Alexandria. So the place Alexandria, and notice the name, Alexandria. So Alexander of Macedon. Notice I didn't say Alexander the Great. No, it's not great. But Alexander of Macedon, he comes in 336 BCE. He brings in the Greeks and they overrun Egypt. And it was a line of invaders from the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. They all come in. And so when Alexander comes in, they destroy. They destroyed quite a bit. So this whole library system, all the libraries were in the temples. So when I go today on educational tours, I actually take people to the temple areas, and inside of the temples, you have the Per-Ankh. Per-Ankh means the house of life, and that's where all the books were manufactured and kept and taught. It's the Per-Ankh, which means house of life. Everyone was schooled and trained in the Per-Ankh. All the scribes trained in the Per-Ankh, the high-level priests. So if Moses was learning all the Egyptian wisdom, he would have had to have been taught in the Per-Ankh like the other people who had that kind of advanced access to the knowledge. But nevertheless, what the Greeks did when they came in is that they ransacked what they could, but they collected all the documents and they collected them and housed them all in this library of Alexandria. The estimate of the library was about 700,000 manuscripts. And people say, well, wait a minute, there's no evidence of a library, of an Alexandrian library. The Greeks are the ones that created it. So wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. The Greeks have no traditions of library in Greece. There's no public or private libraries. They don't go to another place and start creating institutions abroad that they don't have at home. So there had to have been some library in the Alexandria region before the Greeks came in and renamed the area, because why would they build a institution to house documents and manuscripts in Africa, and they've never done it at home? Even in the era of Greeks' heyday, you don't find libraries. So the Alexandrian library was burned several times, but the estimate is that 700,000 manuscripts were lost with Alexandria. So this would have been and was knowledge for that influence of many different nations, because people took this, they took it to Greece, and the Alexandrian library with some of the knowledge could have certainly influenced the libraries of Timbuktu. But I don't know if we have direct evidence of that, because it is thousands of years apart. But what we do know is that the Alexandrian library is a tremendous example of African intellectual greatness, to be able to write that many manuscripts on all kinds of subjects. And then in Timbuktu, in West Africa, that educational and library system comes along later. It's a huge educational system in West Africa, in current day Mali. And by the way, there was estimated 25,000 students in the area of Timbuktu. But I don't know if there's a direct connection there, because you have intellectual developments in different areas, and one doesn't necessarily have to influence the other. But for me as a historian, that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years apart. So that's why it may not be a direct relationship, but you're right. You have two traditions of high level scholarship. In terms of the female rulers, in Egypt, there's 5 female rulers. The people know about the most prominent one, Hatshepsut, but there's 5 female rulers, because the line, the throne, the kingship was passed from mother to daughter. That's how it was passed, not only in Egypt, but the same thing so there's female rulers in Egypt throughout the entire period. And they will become rulers whenever there is 2 reasons the 5 women will become rulers in Egypt. 5 reasons. 2 reasons. Number 1 would be if the male heir was too young to rule, or if there were no male heirs. Those are the 2 reasons why you have the 5 female rulers from the 1st dynasty all the way to the 19th dynasty. The reason why people know about Hatshepsut as a female ruler is because there's no way to put a sheet over her monument. No one can deny those massive temples and columns and statues that she had built. But the other 4, people can try to play tricks on the public and make it seem like they didn't exist, even though it's not all that easy to do, because Tawosret, for example, another female ruler in the 19th dynasty, right after Hatshepsut, we're talking about 1200 or so BCE, Tawosret's tomb, we're talking Egypt, 5 female rulers, the 5th ruler, Tawosret's tomb is, guess where? In the Valley of the Kings. That's where her tomb is. And she was a legitimate ruler, just like Hatshepsut was. And then if we go further south in Kush, there's a line of female rulers called the Kendaki queens. Kendaki, the Greeks changed it to Candace queens. And this is a whole line of female rulers in Sudan. And so, and by the way, it is the women that control the crown. You say, wait a minute, now the men were the ones that are normally king. Yes, the king might be the symbol of authority, but the source of that authority was always the women. No king had a legitimate kingship until he was in a ceremony that was ran by his mother. You have Taharqa, for example. He sent for his mother to preside over his installment ceremony, and that is the reality about the Kushite tradition of elevating the queen mother. And so they wanted to keep it in-house. And you're right, Brother Reginald. So it wasn't patriarchal. That's a Western way. It was a matriarchal, and a matriarchal, focal-centered culture, and you can see that by how they prioritize the crown, the kingship, the throne in the female line. One last point: Well, why would the king marry his sister? He's marrying his sister because that's a political arrangement. He has to marry his sister in order to be a legitimate ruler. Well, wait a minute. Why does he have a second wife? He has a second wife for conjugal reasons, to have children. The first wife is his sister, to marry her politically so that the throne stays in the female line. And this is what we find in one image after another in terms of the high status of female leadership, among Africans. And to the other question I see in the chat, maybe you put it in there before I mentioned it, but Napoleon came in 1799, but there's a drawing that of 1755, where the nose is already off. So Napoleon, he actually was not the one who blew the nose off. I know a lot of scholars have said that, but when I checked it out, that's not the case, because there's the beard and the nose is missing long before Napoleon came in.
Okay, thank you. Got a lot of hands up. Let's go TK, and then we're gonna go Ron Cole, and then we're gonna go Brother Lacey after that. Okay.
All right, this is TK, and a wonderful presentation, brother. Once again, you do not disappoint. You always bring it. But my question is to the statues. Okay, I've been to London and some parts of Europe and stuff, and I see their statues. I've never been to Egypt, but from the pictures I've seen, they have it next to a man or anything like that. Their statues are huge, huge. And even if there's a group of them together, symbolizing different men or whatever figures they have, they seem to be at the same height. And the statues I've seen, you see the faces, this perfect scale. It's not like the nose or the lips are out of proportion or anything like that, but yet they're huge. So I want to know, why did they make them so big?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Well, that's the question. It's like, this is greatness on a whole nother level. And when you see the building of monuments and images of people, you're right, you go and it's the colossal size that's stunning, that's amazing, because that's how they saw themselves. They saw themselves in a whole different light than most people see. You can't shrink and be big in the world. They stood up and the images that you see is a manifestation of them and how they saw themselves in the world. They were building for eternity. Like, for example, if you all imagine, if you can, I think most of you might can imagine these statues in a place called Abu Simbel. This is in the southern part of Egypt. There are 4 seated statues of Ramses the Great. It's 4 seated. If you can imagine those, they're popular statues of Ramses II, and he's sitting there. And do you know when the tour guides take people there, that's when they try to unleash on Ramses, because when you go to one archaeological site after another, then you go to Abu Simbel in the south, yet another statue that's 65 feet high, and the statue is carved to perfection. I mean, they weren't just stonemasons. They had the eye of an optometrist, carving the specific details of the toenails and the knee joint, all of this. And so people say that Ramses was a megalomaniac. In other words, he was ego tripping. He was fascinated on himself. No. Let's be clear. Ramses in the 19th dynasty, he was trying to continue the tradition of building for eternity. All those ancestors of him that built massive pyramids that confound the world. There's an old proverb that all the world fears time, but time itself fears the pyramids. These are monuments that were built to last for eternity. So when you get all the way from the early pyramid age to the time of Ramses in the 19th dynasty, he's building in a great tradition. So I always tell the guy that we're not going to tell that to my group. He is not a megalomaniac. He's not ego tripping. You were just intimidated when you see a brother who's building on that level. So, brothers shrink. And you ever notice that the brothers that are real tall, they kind of bend down a little bit so they're less intimidating? Maybe not all the tall brothers, but that is very common. That's very, very common. Brothers trying to be unassuming. Because if you look too big and bad, then somebody might attack you. And we've had that. So Ramses clearly intimidates people when they look up and they see a 65-foot high statue, and he's absolutely unapologetic. but they built on that scale because of their view of themselves. They didn't think small, and nor did they execute on a small level. It's almost beyond imagination to think on that scale. So the place, if you all look it up, is you take a look at Abu Simbel. Take a look at that, and some of you may know what I'm referring to. Yes, Abu Simbel would have been flooded by the Nile. So what happened was it was an international effort from 1960 to 1970 to take the statues of Ramses II and his wife Nefertari, to take those temples apart block by block and move them to higher ground. And that's so they would have been flooded. But Abu Simbel, those temples are wonders of the world. But the level in which they built is absolutely extraordinary. Hey, folks, I'm saying it is very difficult for people today to think big on that level and be unapologetic and to be uncompromising. When you look at that level, it's like, what? I mean, hey, look, let me tell you something. To be great on that level is almost selfish. Give other people a chance to be great, to be building like that. So when people entered the land, everyone had to be in awe. And think about it. People are in awe today. Think about when it was in its heyday and people were building monuments on that level. I mean, some of the statues are absolutely unbelievable, and the monuments. It's like, wow, that's what inspires people. That's when I take educational tours. I can tell you this. I would say half the group, you don't need a round trip ticket. You're going to fly back to the States or wherever you're from just on enthusiasm and inspiration alone. It's going to get you back home. Anyway, so that's what I would say. It's greatness at an astounding level.
Wonderful. All right, let's go Ronald Cole, and then Brother Lacey, you're teed up.
All right, great presentation. Abu Simbel is off the hook, but I wanted you to speak on what I noticed was when I was in Cairo and Alexandria, it appeared that it appeared mulatto. I didn't see a lot of dark-skinned people until we went down the Nile and got to Nubia. That's when they were hollering Obama and everybody was my color. So I know, what is that, Alexander the Great and the Syrians and the Arabs used to attack northern Egypt. I attribute it to that. But could you also speak to, because what confuses me when I read, the northern part is called Lower Egypt and the southern part is called Upper Egypt. Can you explain that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, the reason why you're correct, the southern part is Upper Egypt, northern part is lower, because the hills are in the south. So as you go in Northeast Africa, let me see if I can bring up the map here to illustrate the point, is that as you go south, you are going up because all of the hills are in the south. Let's try, this one here is not bad. Well, we'll do this one. Okay, so let me bring this up here and show you. So yeah, all the hills and mountains are in the south. That's why the Nile, let's see here. Are you all looking at the map now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. So this area here is a lot of mountains. So this is up south, and then notice that there are different tributaries that contribute to the Nile, which is the longest river in the world. So you have the so-called White Nile, the Blue Nile that originates in these southern areas here, in the southern areas. The White Nile originates in the area here of Uganda, Kenya. This area here is called the Great Lakes area, and this is in the elevated south area. And then there's the Blue Nile. This originates in Lake Tana in Ethiopia. It's in the highlands. So you got the Blue Nile running down north and the White Nile running down north from the hills. And then you have the Atbara River. The Atbara is also in Ethiopia in the highlands. So these three rivers, these three tributaries are contributing to the longer Nile. And so as the Nile is winding its way in this direction here, is actually going downhill, and then it finally empties into the Mediterranean. So that's why people say In the south is Upper Egypt, and then in the north is Lower Egypt because of the terrain. So in other words, you see the map, this map here, we really have to turn the map upside down because that's how we would look at it. We would look at the south being up and the north being down. So it's just a necessary reorientation of how we understand geography. And so it's just, you know, mountains in the south, hills in the south, and the delta or the valley in the north. And by the way, so this is the direction of the Nile, and this is Lower Egypt. Alexandria, which will be right here in this area. If you can see here, this is Alexandria. This is why it was easy for foreigners to come in. And then, yeah, Arabs finally came in around 639, 640 of the Common Era. That's when the Arabs came in. So the Arabs who are mainly there today have nothing to do with the civilization of the past. No relationship at all.
So would it be fair to say, since the rivers is flowing north, the way the rivers flow is determining why they call it lower and upper?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Fantastic. All right, Brother Lacey, you're up.
Yes, sir. First of all, Professor Ampim, thank you not only for tonight, but your lifetime of educating all of us.
Thank you.
I had heard, please verify for me, that the oldest carbon dated fossils were found in the Fertile Crescent or Mesopotamia. Is that right? Number one. And number two, where does Al-Kabu fit in that timeline? And the statues that TK was referring to and their scope, it's been said engineers today can't reproduce that or replicate that, I should say. So what credence do you put to the theory that the methodology our ancestors used was by levitation?
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, a couple of things. The term a cable line, and Lanny just put it in the chat. A cable line, that is actually a name that's it's a misnomer. But one of the great scholars, Yosef Ben Jochannan, who passed around 2015, and he should be credited for his great work. He wrote a book, Yosef Ben Jochannan, Black Man of the Nile and His Family. And he wrote the African origin of the major Western religions. So we do credit Dr. Ben, but on the question of a cable line, there's no evidence that Africa was ever called a cable line. There's no evidence that there was any part of Africa that was called a cable line. Although it's a very common name. People use a cable line today as their last name. We have the cable line bookstores, the cable line study groups. So it's just a popular myth. Now, if it's not a myth, guess what? Documentation beats conversation. Where's the map? Show us a map. Let us independently look at a map or any kind of written text. So this is just the era of Brother Donald that is out there. And so there's really no cable line. If so, then someone should produce evidence. And you also mentioned about, the oldest human remains that you mentioned. You asked that?
Yes.
Okay, so the oldest human remains, actually, the oldest, I'm not talking about half ape, half monkey, half chimpanzee. The oldest human remains, Homo sapiens sapiens, those that are anatomically human. These remains, we find them in the East African region, Ethiopia, Tanzania, in that area. In Tanzania, there's an Olduvai Gorge, which is often called the cradle of humanity. Yes. That's where the oldest Homo sapiens have been found. I'm not talking about some evolutionary types. Nope, Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, this has been done, as some of you might know, by Louis Leakey, Mary Leakey, and their son Richard Leakey, going back to the 1960s. But to support the work of the Leakey family has been the DNA research of Rebecca Kahn at UC Berkeley. So back in 1987, Rebecca Kahn, that's C-A-N-N, she and her team did DNA research. They did DNA research to trace the lineage of every ethnic and racial group in the world. So it was 157 people, and they determined that there's obviously only one humanity, and that humanity, Homo sapiens sapiens, developed in East Africa going back about 150 to 200,000 years ago, based on the DNA evidence that supports the physical evidence of the remains. Now, some people think that maybe a southern African origin, but that's less likely than the East African origin and region. So that's what has been established through the DNA research. In other words, everybody on the planet, they trace their lineage. It's gonna go to one founding group, one founding population in the East African region, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, right in that area of the Eastern African region. And I think I got your question. Was there one more?
And the levitation to build the pyramids?
Okay, yeah. Thank you. That would need to hammer in. Okay, that's myth, legend, and fable by anti-Black racists. Rather than acknowledge the fact that these are African builders, these people, they couldn't claim anything. So what they've come up with is some wild theories. I'm talking about the myth makers, like Ancient Alien series. They either talk about interplanetary travelers or some impossible type of thing. So there's no direct information about how pyramids were built. We know that the work groups were formed. We know how long they worked. We know a lot of those things, but in terms of them laying out an actual plan of how they constructed monuments, we don't have it. This idea about levitation and them building monuments, there's one monument, I'm gonna see if I can find it while I'm talking. It's the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep. In that tomb, it does not show, in that tomb does not show how they built pyramids, but in the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, it does, let me stop this one. It does show how they moved a very large statue. And so in the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, this is the only evidence of how they move large statues. And you can see the large statue of Jehuti-Hotep being pulled literally by a rope by 172 men. You can see them pulling the rope. And underneath that, there are 3 individuals. And the text of these 3 guys holding something says, I'm sorry, the 172 men, it says moving a colossus. That's what it says, moving a colossus. But the 3 men, people say, oh, they're levitating. So not at all. They're on the ground, number one, and it's not even stone, it's wood. But people are amazing. They want fantastic stories with no evidence. So, I mean, there's no reason for it. But what we do know is it's African hardcore scientists. This is why they were able to create the first accurate solar calendar based on scientific observation and application. You know, so let me see. So no levitation. And Brother Ronald, so if we got other comments, let me see if I can find this one image while, if we have time to get to another person.
Thank you.
Okay.
You know, it's just racism. Let's just call it like it is. You know,
Absolutely.
That's it.
There was an iPhone that had their hand up the whole time. I'm not quite sure who that is, but who's on an iPhone that had a question? Please speak up now. Okay, so
I'm on an iPhone.
Okay, go ahead. Oh no, that was you, Reggie Pate. Go ahead, Reggie.
Yeah, I was going to say I did. I had my question. That was half an hour ago now. Okay, but it's like every group that came in, the Greeks came in, changed the names of the countries, changed the names of some of the characters, like biblical characters. Like you guys say Jesus, I say Yeshua. Jesus is a Greek, his Roman Greco name. Why don't we use why? And if you look at the New Testament, that's after the Europeans came in. Everybody in the Old Testament has either Hebrew names or Aramaic names. In the New Testament, they all have European names. The people we grew up seeing as characters in the Bible were all Europeans. You know, this isn't something that is an accident. And a lot of people say, well, it doesn't make a difference. If it didn't make a difference, they wouldn't have done it. They've taken those European faces and those European names all over the world, and everywhere they went, every continent they landed on was a person's color. and they used it to pretty much pillage or whatever they wanted to do to that particular area. But he was talking about the names of, I had planned on going to Ethiopia before the COVID. I was going to go this year. Cush. How many other places in the area? Because I know just in history, from everywhere, from the waterfalls and everything else, or it's all either European and one way or the other. Do you have the original names for the other countries that were renamed?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. We should use original names when we know them. I totally agree with that. So as I teach classes on Egypt or Kemet, for example, most of the names are foreign names. The word Pharaoh is a Greek name. The real name is Per-ah, which means great house. There's hieroglyphs, that's a Greek word. The original name is Medu Neter, which means divine language or holy script. But that entire area really, was broken up in 1884 with the Berlin Conference. So a lot of the countries, they weren't the countries then as we know them now. So we had more, we had vast regions and just smaller areas. But so the names were different. That's why I did show Kush and Kemet. Nubia is a common name, but then you also have more regional names as well. So I agree with you that we should use the names of people and places that are in the original because they give us great insight. Plus, why follow other people? But it would require a renaming across the board so we can be as consistent as possible. But I agree with you. And it also depends on what language we're speaking in as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's the other part of it.
Well, with us, we learned their language. We didn't have a language. They put their language in us.
Yeah. Well, you see what I did? I changed my name and I didn't ask permission. Nobody.
I hear you.
You don't change my name and then no. So look, this is the Jehuti Hotep here. This is Brother Donald, this is the only image that we see in the history of them moving a large statue. Other than that, you can only guess about how stones were moved. You can see where stones were quarried from. You can see quarry marks and how they move large stones, but no images of this. So this is 172 men. These are 4 people. I mean, this is 4, this is 4, this is 4, and this is a rope, and they're pulling this sled. The man here, he's pouring liquid to reduce the friction, as you can see here. Here's a man on the knee of the great official. He's on the knee. What is he doing? He's clapping to provide rhythm to make the work lighter. And then this levitation business, I don't know what all people are talking about it, but in one instance, when people are talking about levitation, they mean these 3 men here. Because someone approached me about this 12 years ago, something like that, and said there were 3 men who were levitating. I couldn't figure out what was the person talking about. I said, oh, I know what you mean. These 3 men, this is a piece of wood, not stone. And as you can see, they're on the ground like everybody else. So, so nothing but myth making. But this is the tomb of Jehuti Hotep, and I just happened to find this online. Someone is connected to the Bible. So I'm not vouching for what they're talking about here. I don't know, but the image is legitimate from the tomb. So I just wanted to show you that.
So Professor, we have 2 hands left that's up. Should we pray out and then just take care of that, or you want to just go over a little bit? How you want to do it?
Well, I'm here for the long haul. Let's, if you want to pray to officially close it, that's fine with me, and then just keep it open for those.
Yeah, just keep it open for discussion because I want to get to Fred Powell and I want to get to Leo Basile. But let me ask someone. Look, first of all, on behalf of Brother to Brother, I want to thank everyone for coming. I just also want to thank our Professor Manu Ampim with just a wonderful presentation, and thank you. Absolutely, from Brother to Brother, we thank you. And we look forward to next week on the 6th where that presentation is going to concentrate on writing and ethical values, and that's on August the 6th. So with that being said, who would like to pray us out? Just to kind of wave at me if you could. All right, Reggie Lyles, you got it? Go ahead, unmute yourself, and let's pray us out. Go ahead.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you for what you've done with the professor in raising him up and giving him a curious mind and a courageous spine and a quick beating heart to study all that he's studied and his willingness to share with us. Now, Lord, we ask that you bless everybody under the sound of my voice and have them come back for next week so that we can learn even more. Thank you, Lord. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Amen.
All right. So, Fred Powell, why don't you go ahead, and then Leo, you're right after them, and then that'll be it, I guess. Go ahead, Fred.
My question is for the professor. Was Africa ever one country? Was it just made up of a lot of different smaller villages and whatever when they started out?
There were many different groups and subgroups and regional groups and tribal groups. So there really was no one Africa at all. So on the one hand, it was a strength, you know, that there was so much diversity, you know, but it's kind of a weakness too, because it's hard for them to come together now because they are focused on their own individual groups. This is why when I go to like Ethiopia and places like that, one group can care less about the other group at all, you know, so they're locked into their own traditions. So much so that, you know, that they don't even, like among some of the group, they don't even intermarry with other groups because they don't respect them like that. It's only in-house. So it's been a lot of diversity, to say the least. Then you've had some larger kingdoms that organize all of the smaller areas into one large groups. And you see that not only in East Africa, you see it in Southern Africa, you see it in West Africa, Central Africa, but there's a lot of diversity on the continent now as it was many thousands of years ago.
Fantastic. All right, Leo, you're up.
I'll pass until next week.
Okay. All righty. All right, anyone else have a comment or?
Thank you.
Great class. Great class.
Yeah, let the professor have some rest.
Thank you.
Yeah, he really did it.
Great class.
Thank you, sir.
Bravo.
Great class.
All right.
Well, let me say that I appreciate you brothers and also sisters that are joining us tonight. And I'm glad I can share just a little bit of what I know. So next week, we'll deal specifically, as Ronald mentioned, specifically with writing and ethical values. And so I think we'll start to deal with contributions. Today was just, you know, kind of a more geographical and a chronological overview. But now we start contributions starting next week. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate you,
Professor.
All right, thank everybody.
He was nice having ladies in the house.
Oh,